Good morning and welcome to Trinity Lutheran Church, Trinity Lutheran Christian School. Anybody who's visitors that are watching us here this morning, welcome to our morning devotion. I am not Mr. Gast, who's normally with us on Tuesdays. Mr. Gast is enjoying some very well-deserved time off. I am Ken Coughlin, and I'm going to be bringing a brief devotion here to you this morning about the unity based upon the Trinity. This past Sunday was Trinity Sunday in our Lutheran tradition, and I had the privilege of being able to give the message in church about the Trinity. And, we walked through all the theological mumbo jumbo, well, what that means. But then at the end, I gave a couple of points about why this matters. And I want to expand on one of those in this morning's devotion. Specifically, at the end of the message, I talked about how the Trinity actually provides us a model for how Jesus wants us to live as his church. And I was referring to John chapter 17, verse 21. And in that verse, Jesus is praying to the Father, and he asks in regard to the church, he prays that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. So Jesus is asking for the church to exhibit a kind of unity just as he and the Father are unified. And I mentioned at the end of the message that that's no small order. If you think about it, Jesus and the Father are both persons in the Trinity. They are bound together so tightly that they're literally one unified God. They cannot be separated in that regard. And that's what he's asking for in the church. So that when the outside world looks at us, they should see one unified community, not a bunch of differences. Now, where I wanted to expand on that this morning is there are also, of course, passages in the Bible that seem to suggest, and sometimes flat out outright do suggest, that there is still going to be some amount of division within the church that's inevitable. Specifically, look at 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 18 and 19. And this is the Apostle Paul talking to the church in Corinth, and he says this. He says, "In the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions among you, and to some extent I believe it. No doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval." There have to be differences is what Paul says here. So in one breath, we have Jesus praying to the Father that we all be unified, but then we have the Apostle Paul saying, look, some differences are going to be inevitable. And so I think it's an important discernment piece for us as Christians to kind of be able to tell the difference between the two. What kind of differences is Paul talking about that are inevitable, and what are the other ones that aren't, that we need to be striving to make sure that we are unified even amongst those differences? And for the answer, we go to the Jesus on the Mount of Olives. In Matthew chapter 24, when he's preaching, the disciples came to him and asked him, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And Jesus, when he's answering them about that, he says, watch out that no one deceives you. And then later on, he mentioned, at that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. That gives us the outline of what kind of differences amongst us are kind of inevitable and in some extent, desirable maybe is not the right word for it, and what others we need to fight against. Look, here's the example I often give. If I were to tell you I was a lawyer, that would tell you certain things about me. You would know, for example, that I've graduated from law school. I've passed at least one bar exam. Why would you know that? Because those are part of the definition of what it means to be a lawyer. Any term like that, any identity piece has to have a definition, and the word Christian is no different. There are certain things that define what it means to be a Christian. And the Trinity, belief in the Trinity and God as the Trinity, is one of those types of boundary lines, those markers of what it means to be a Christian and what it doesn't. Obviously, we're going to have disagreements about that. There are, religious groups today, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, who do not share our belief in the Trinity. Well, then we would say that means, obviously we want to have respectful dialogue with everybody, but we don't believe that falls under the umbrella of Christianity if you don't hold to those core beliefs. So that's the kind of thing that Paul is talking about. There's going to be some differences about those core essentials of what it means to be a Christian. And and that's true of any definition we have out there. So within those essential parameters, for anyone who shares those essential beliefs, Jesus wants us to demonstrate that unity that he was praying for with the Father. But there's a lot of differences that are on non-essential matters, things that aren't those core beliefs. Whether or not we should be using a traditional or a contemporary style of worship, whether or not, what is the proper mode of baptism, how often should we be partaking of the Lord's Supper, should we have spaghetti or ham at the church dinner, okay? Those types of things, while churches are absolutely free to practice whatever they believe is the best practice in those regards. What we need to be cautious of is that we don't become so divided over issues like that even though we may have our own worship services, our own worship styles, we still consider ourselves part of the same universal church, and we work together in furthering God's kingdom. It was 17th century Lutheran theologian Rupertus Maldinius, and I'm probably mispronouncing that, who I believe actually came up with a quote, sometimes is attributed to Augustine, but I think this is the first time we actually saw it, was from in his writings. And he said this, he said, "In essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; in all things, charity." That's the model that I think we as Christians need to follow in trying to further that unity that Jesus was praying that we would exemplify, just as he and the Father are unified. All right? Thank you very much. You all have a blessed day in the Lord. God bless.